Hey there, my name is Jared, and welcome to my Jared Talk. Today we're going to talk about abortion, and today's presentation is Abortion Isn't Murder: Why Making Abortion Illegal is Anti-Christ. First off, I just want to say that this lecture or presentation is going to be dedicated to any woman who has ever felt shame for getting an abortion, for considering an abortion, or for any woman who has been in support of another woman who has ever gotten an abortion, whether or not that was your daughter or your granddaughter, whether or not that was a friend or someone in your family. There is a lot of shame and judgment that the church has often put on women for making a decision for themselves. And I sincerely hope that any woman who has ever felt shame at all for ever having one or considering having an abortion, I hope that you're able to find self-compassion, acceptance, and forgiveness. And in all ways, in my opinion, I don't believe that abortion is a sin. But in case you do, I hope that you're able to find forgiveness. And I know that God offers that to those who believe that it is. We're going to be going through a lot of different aspects and perspectives of this topic, mostly from a biblical perspective. And then we're going to be talking somewhat about the game theory involved as far as whose intentions are at play and why do certain actors sort of care so much about this issue. But again, we're going to be focusing mostly on the words of Jesus. We're going to be focusing on the life and example of Jesus and trying to make sense of it so that we can maybe shed some light on this complex issue. This is a very gray area, and I just want to thank you for your time, attention, and energy before we get going. My first question today, or my first point, is I want you to think about a little mental note here. Before Jesus is killed, one of the things that threatens the existing powers that be is the fact that Jesus forbids commerce in God's house. Okay, and this takes place in Mark 11, 15 through 18, verses 15 through 18. And it says, "On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, 'Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers?' The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching." And this is a very incredible verse because this basically, Jesus presses the red button, and now he's a threat to other people's ability to profit and make money. And whenever you are a threat to that, often they will try to kill you, right? This leads to his eventual crucifixion and death. And this is a critical part of Jesus' story. So today, similarly to the temple courts, there are thousands of mega churches in the US that sell goods, food and drink, merchandise, books, similar to the temple courts of Jesus' time. It's a very, very similar parallel, especially in America, especially in the West. If I go to one of these mega churches and I overturn those bookstores and flip over the for-profit food stands, would I be following or not following the example of Christ? Think about it. Jesus does this. If I follow in Jesus' example, am I being Christ-like or am I being anti-Christ? And I would say that many people would identify me as a troublemaker. The church, the state, the government, the news. There would probably be a warrant out for me if I was to do something like this, even though it's very Christ-like, right? It's something that's Jesus forbade commerce in God's house. And yet, here we are, selling merchandise, selling home goods, selling books in thousands of churches in the United States. It's quite perverse, and Jesus does not want anything to do with this sort of profit motive. Now, with that out of the way, let's go to basically the birth of Christ. We're going to talk about once Jesus is born, basically an angel of the Lord appears to Joseph in a dream. He says, "Get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." This is in Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. And we see that King Herod is threatened by the idea of a Messiah, so threatened that he wants to take him out before he is born. Or not before he's born, but before he's of age to be a threat to his throne. For those who have studied business, you might learn about SWOT analysis. It's an appraisal of your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And King Herod has identified a threat here. And he's like, let's kill him out before he becomes kind of a threat. And we see next in verse 16 that King Herod gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. Now, this is speculated as whether or not this happened, whether or not how many boys were actually affected. Also, it's kind of like it's just an interesting thing because it always brings me so many questions thinking about why are some of these details brought up in the Bible, as well as what is the purpose of them and what can we infer from them. Always brings me so many questions. So some of these questions include, are some babies just sacrifices for God's prophecy? And you can internalize this or understand this word just in two ways. Are some babies just sacrifices, like only sacrifices? And then you can also think, are they justified sacrifices? And in this case, I don't really know. And it's hard for me to think about the story of Jesus being born as well as the story of other babies being killed. And that was all a part of it, right? My next question is, could Jesus have been the Messiah and come out of Egypt without the baby killing? Like, why are those mutually exclusive? Like, what, aren't those mutually exclusive? Can't they just exist apart? I think a part of it is that Matthew often makes kind of the connection between Jesus being the new Moses. And Moses he rescued the people from Egypt. Jesus, God warns Joseph, his father, to flee to Egypt as a refugee and let's lay low for a while until the bad ruler, King Herod, is off, until we have a more peaceful time. But with that said, if God warned Joseph, why didn't God warn all the other newborn parents to flee like Joseph to prevent the innocent death? Did that happen? Did it not happen? Doesn't say it happened. So I'm kind of erring on that side that there was some child sacrifice here. It's kind of sad, it doesn't even say that. Child sacrifice happened at the time of Jesus and was part of the prophecy in order for him to exist. And finally, when you read Matthew 2, it's kind of said almost nonchalantly in a way where it's like, it just happened. We don't hear Jesus give a moral judgment on the situation. So my question is, why didn't Jesus condemn or give an opinion of this gruesome event? And why didn't Jesus fight for laws preventing this type of massacre from ever happening again? This is one of those things where Jesus never really fights politically in the way that we do today. He's not looking for power. He's not looking for control. He's not looking to make things legal or illegal. He's oftentimes letting people do what they want and oftentimes recommending things that he wants them to do with the understanding that he ultimately can't control them. And so these are just some of the questions that I have in reading this passage. I want you to, in listening to this, I want you to speculate everything that I'm saying. I want you to question everything. I want you to read the Bible on your own and ask your own questions. It is not weird. It is not evil. It is not bad to have questions and to think about them and to ask them. I pray about these questions a lot. I ask God for guidance. If you seek, you will find. You know what I mean? If you ask, it shall be given to you. And I think you might be perturbed by these questions right now. And I'm saying it's okay for you to be perturbed, but also it's okay for you to have your own questions too. You're a human being with a mind. And in order for us to learn, a lot of times we have to ask questions. We will not learn anything unless we are inquisitive. If we just accept things as they are handed down to us, as they are spoon-fed to us, did we really learn, or did we just succumb? Did we just agree? Are we just sheep? And I would encourage you today to be a critical thinker, to be a critical believer if you are one, and to put those skills to work, So this brings us to an interesting question. Because Jesus never fought for child murder laws to make it illegal, are pro-life Christian conservatives who fight for anti-abortion laws to make abortion illegal following or not following the example of Christ. And you can scour the New Testament for Jesus' example, and he never fights for laws. He never tries to force people. And so this makes it really uncomfortable for me to think that pro-life Christian conservatives are actually following Jesus' example. Maybe this energy and behavior is actually anti-Christ. And you might be like, oh, that's blasphemy or something. And why is it? I don't think it looks anything like Jesus. And today we almost associate, just because someone calls them a Christian doesn't mean that they're Christ-like. Just because the majority is doing it a particular way doesn't mean jack. You know what I mean? We have to start asking ourselves these things where it's like, if Jesus flipped over the table of the church, of people making money and trying to profit, that's what Jesus actually did. But am I Christ-like or not Christ-like? And I would say I'm Christ-like, right? That previous question. In this case, Jesus never fights for laws in the way that Christian conservatives do today. And I think that fight is not Christ-like. We'll kind of get into later why people are then incented to do that, why people do from a human perspective. And it makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't mean it's the best use of our time and energy, right? My next claim from a biblical perspective about why abortion is not murder is that abortion and murder do not share the same intention. Matthew chapter 5 is probably my favorite chapter of the Bible. It is part of Jesus' longest sermon called the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount happens between Matthew's chapter 5, 6, and 7. So I encourage you to read it as much as you can, because I think it is peak Bible, it is peak Jesus. If you're really trying to understand who Jesus is, what he stands for, who he is, how can I be closer to his perspective or his life? I think that this is a central part of that. It's his longest speech. Clearly, it has the most words and has a lot of incredible wisdom that we should be trying to understand more and more. So we'll start in Matthew 5:28, which says, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The Old Testament shares with us the 10 commandments. One of those commandments is, do not commit adultery. For those who don't know, adultery is like having sex outside of marriage. It also means that if I am married, that I cheat on my partner and I have sex with someone else outside of that relationship. That is kind of a basic understanding of what adultery is. So Jesus in this case is saying, you have heard that you shouldn't commit adultery, but that is a binary, finite rule, and that is not enough anymore. In order to really get down to the root of adultery, we have to get to the root of what leads to adultery. And oftentimes what leads to adultery is lustful eyes. If I'm looking at a particular person in a way where it's like, oh my God, they look very attractive. Or I'm weighing out, oh, well, they look a little bit more attractive than who I'm currently with. Or, you know what I mean? It can kind of create these things where it's like, I'm then going to feed that into my mind, and then I will be committing adultery with that person actually in my heart before I ever actually did anything. So basically, Jesus is saying, it's not really about the sin, it's about the roots of sin. You guys heard it was like this before, finite rules. And I'm saying, no, we're bringing infinite rules now, rules that you will continuously have to kind of work at for your whole life in order to prevent sin from ever happening. Okay, so if we back up a couple more verses in Matthew 5:21 and 22, Jesus then talks about murder. And he says, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment as if they had committed murder. Jesus kind of says it in this way, is that you have heard that it was said, do not commit murder. And anyone who commits murder will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. To me, it means that these two acts are guilty of the same judgment. And it's also further saying that anger is oftentimes the root of murder. And if we look at cases of murder, why do people murder? Why do people shoot people? There can be some outlier cases with like psychopaths or different outlier things on a mental level. But I think a lot of murder starts from a seed of anger. We can look at, a lot of times it's about vengeance. Look at things like war. War involves murder. Let's think about 9/11 and after 9/11 happens, America is incredibly angry at the Middle East, at Arabs, at Muslims, at terrorists. Incredibly angry, though, so much so that we send military to over there and we murder people. Some of them are terrorists, some of them are civilians. Most of them are civilians, right? But it's almost like justified. It's justified anger. I'm allowed to be angry about you killing me, and I can fight back, but wrapped up in that is murder. And you really wouldn't have war today if you didn't have anger. If you kill someone that I really love, I'm going to be vengeful and maybe take you out. I might be tempted to do that. If I have road rage, you're starting to see this more and more in the news, where sometimes road rage is leading to somebody taking a gun out and shooting the other driver just because they pissed them off that day. It's like this verse is very telling, because Jesus is telling us that the root of murder is oftentimes anger. So what I take away from this is that lust leads to adultery, and then anger leads to murder. And it's not so much about finite rules anymore. Jesus brings in heaven, which is an infinite place. And in order to have an infinite place, you kind of have to have infinite rules. It's not about finite binaries anymore. Did you commit murder or did you not commit murder? Did you use my name in vain or did you not use my name in vain? It's about thinking of the sins in a perpetual light, in a way where it's like, what are the things that actually lead to anyone doing these things? And how can I rid these things out of my life? How can I clean up my heart so that I have no risk of ever making time for anything that could ever lead to sin? And this is sort of like a complex idea that I never ever really heard any other pastor really share. But this is how I internalize my favorite part of the Bible and Jesus' longest speech, the Sermon on the Mount. So abortion and murder do not share the same intention. So how does this relate to abortion? And I would ask, are pregnant women angry with the baby when they get an abortion? If abortion truly is murder against a fetus, why isn't the pregnant woman angry with the baby? The mother might be experiencing lots of complex emotions, but I do not think anger is one of them. Okay? And there might be some anger towards the male counterpart that created the conception. Some women are raped. Some guys are trying to lock down a woman with using deceptive moves. Some people are deadbeats. Some people are kind of just sleeping with as many people as they can. And I could see things where there's anger sometimes for the pregnant woman to be angry with their partner or whoever got them pregnant. But I never see it actually being angry with the fetus or with the baby. And if you've ever had an abortion, or if you know someone who has had an abortion, this might be an interesting thing to ask or understand, because if anger is the root of murder, then how can abortion be murder if they don't share the same intention? To me, if we ask ourselves, what is the root of abortion? It's a response to the unpreparedness for the consequences of sex. And I'm not trying to put that all in the woman's case. I think in many cases, these are very gray areas where humans will be humans. People will experiment with their sexuality. Eve will eat the apple. God doesn't make a law telling her, don't eat the apple. People are going to, experiment. They are going to be human, And sometimes they will be unprepared for those consequences. And sometimes the act of sex in some cases is not even on the woman at all. It's so much on the man if they are raped, if they are forced into this, if they are, if there's incest involved, that's very dark. And in many ways, it almost seems like there's more of a burden on the pregnant teenager than on the vile penetrator. It's this weird world where we just want the baby birthed for whatever reason. Like, we're in a baseball game, we have to slide to home. And it's like, we don't have to do that. We can think about what what are the root causes of abortion? Let's think about that. Let's not make it harder for people. Let's try to understand. It's not a black and white issue. It's a very gray issue with a lot of nuance. And we can try. God gave us a brilliant mind if we use it, if we try to ask questions. And if it is in fact the unpreparedness for the consequences of sex, not blaming women and not saying that they are responsible for all of it, a lot of times it's oftentimes it's the man being irresponsible, right? And maybe even convincing the woman to go along with it, right? And there's an unpreparedness here that we need to kind of isolate and try to understand. We can try to understand the complex emotions that pregnant women go through if they ever go through with an abortion or are considering it. And these complex emotions might be stress, sadness, fear, guilt, shame, defeat, stigmatization. And if they get the abortion, grief, mourning. These are the things I think pregnant women feel, and they do not feel angry. They do not feel anger. And so thus I don't think that they share the same root, and therefore I don't think abortion is murder. My final point from a biblical perspective on why abortion isn't murder is in the Last Supper. In the Last Supper, Jesus predicts Judas's betrayal of him. Basically, they're all eating and drinking and having their nice time, and Jesus says, "But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." And this is a very controversial verse with lots of different, I'm not saying I know the correct interpretation of this. Question everything that I'm saying today. I am not entirely right. You will never be entirely right. I want you to think about this, though, from what could this mean? And first off, the context is that Jesus knows he's about to die in 24 hours. He knows that one of his own that he has spent the last 3 years in close contact with is about to trade him in for a small sum of money. He's going to hand him over to the government and tell them, this is a bad guy. And Jesus has to be experiencing incredible frustration and disappointment. One of his own, 1 out of 12 betrays him. 1 out of 12 denies him. Next thing we can think about is maybe this is a cultural figure of speech. A way people might think of that is, wouldn't want to be that guy who does this awful thing to the Son of Man, to Jesus. It would be better for him if he had not been born. But there are also other ways to think about this. One of the ways I think about it is that maybe Jesus is saying it would be better if he wasn't born. Maybe if he was stillborn. How else would someone not be born? It would be better if his parents didn't have unprotected sex. It would be better for his mom to have gotten an abortion. And the interesting complexity of here is that it's not super clear. And I hope that even people who think they have a firm understanding of the Bible, it's that it's only a small fraction and a small glimpse at Jesus' life. Jesus was in ministry for 3 years, it says. That's about 1,000 days, more or less. And I think it only really talks about maybe a couple dozen of those days. We are getting a very small fraction of the life of Jesus and the words of Jesus. And it's important to sort of have an open mind, while also just, if you have questions, to present them to God so that maybe you can experience wisdom. If we seek, we will find, right? And so I don't know what is the best way to interpret this verse. These are some things that come to my mind. And it's just to further say that this is a complex thing. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm saying how I'm thinking about this situation. And I encourage you to think of your own situation. How would you interpret this? Those are my 3 kind of major points about why abortion isn't murder from a biblical perspective. And now, as a reasonable person, I'd like to present a question. What evidence would I need to believe in the Christian fight to make abortion illegal? What would I need to see? This is an important question for anyone with beliefs, whoever thinks a particular way. If you have an assumption in your mind or a thought, or, oh, this is the way it should be, but you've never thought of the alternative, like, you should maybe think about that a little bit more, because I think a lot of people inherit their views. And I encourage you to create your own. You are your own being, and I'm not telling you to be different or difficult. I am telling you to sort of seek peace and pursue it with these verses so we can understand it. The more people who are just trying to understand, maybe we will have more understanding. And for me, as a reasonable person, for me to be on the pro-life Christian conservative mission, I would need to see a verse that clearly says that abortion is murder. Abortion existed before Jesus' existence. It has existed thousands of years before Jesus was born. We see it mentioned in Egypt, in many other countries, and many other cultures. Okay? There's not a clear verse that says that abortion is murder. Okay? Further, I would need to see a verse where Jesus passes moral judgment on the massacre of innocents and stand up for those dead baby boys. If that is in fact true and you accept the word of God as true, why does it say it so nonchalantly without any sort of opinion? Further, why doesn't Jesus fight to make government-ordered child sacrifice illegal so that a massacre like that can never happen again? Many pro-life people who are trying to make abortion illegal, in my perspective, are basically doing it in a way where it's like, one abortion is too many, is too much. We must force it so that there is zero abortions. And if Jesus ever fought for legislation, I would agree with you that that is the right course of action. But because Jesus never does, I think that that is actually opposite the example of Christ. And further, I think that is anti-Christ. But this is what I would need. These are my reasonable requests to provide clarity on the matter. And that's the thing. You can probably make a support and case for any sort of belief system that you have from the Bible, And I encourage you to just think about if you have beliefs that, I never really thought about it. What would I need to believe the alternative? And to ask yourself these questions, because if we're so closed-minded, we will never learn something new, and we will just be like kind of an ignorant sheep. Even though the phrase is ignorance is bliss, I think there's an implied word there, which is ignorance is blind bliss. Ignorance hopes that it's bliss. Ignorance just doesn't know. And I hope that you challenge yourself to read more of Jesus' words and Jesus' example. Because if you really consider yourself a Christian, that is the gold standard, right? That is who we are to emulate our lives after. Many churches today, I would like to kind of create an analogy here. I think many churches, especially mega churches in the West and America, they are much like nests, birds' nests, where the congregation are baby birds and the pastor or the minister is like the mama bird. And the mama bird collects the food, chews up the food, and feeds her young. And she leaves the nest, and she presents the truth and chews it up for them. Chews up the food, their nutrition. I think pastors do the same thing, especially if they make a lot of money. And they are chewing up God's word and feeding it to baby birds. And if you are someone who just goes to church on somewhat of a regular basis and you don't read the Bible, I would encourage you next time just to maybe don't go to church and just read the Bible. It is important for people to start chewing their food, to start chewing God's word, start thinking about it, start praying about it, not just taking something. A lot of pastors will mix some truth with what you want to hear, and they'll put it together to create this experience for you so that you feel like you're getting closer. And I would argue that the bigger the church is, the more they are telling you what you want to hear. Right? They are incented to tell you specific things so that you keep coming back, so that you keep giving them money, so that the pastor in the three-piece suit can spend more time at Joseph A. Bank than reading the story of Joseph. Okay? Read your word if you believe. And if you don't really believe, maybe leave the nest a little bit. Quit being a little baby bird. You're meant to fly. God's word is meant to move mountains. If you're just going to your air-conditioned pew and sitting in the same seat you have for the last decade, taking in the same chewed up sermon, I don't think you're actually getting closer to God. And I encourage you to get a little closer today. So, and this is in the realm of your possibility. After reading this, just go read the Sermon on the Mount. Go read it for yourself. Go read it straight through. Read all of Jesus' words. Read all the red letters. Read them. Try to internalize them and make sense of them so that you can be closer to God, right? That's what this is all after. You can't be closer if you're just getting closer to a person. You really can't. It's counterintuitive. Jesus never preached in a building, but somehow all the churches are in buildings, right? Something ain't adding up. And it's kind of, it's very perverse. So try reading some more. Next, I'd like to talk about the Ten Commandments. And we're going to talk about the Ten Commandments in terms of what they are and kind of like their relationship to what forgiveness is. If you're Jewish, you believe in the Ten Commandments. If you're Christian, you believe in the Ten Commandments. If you're Muslim, you believe in the Ten Commandments. These are universal rules that are sort of many people abide by, or are trying their best to. So the Ten Commandments start with 4 sins against God. There are no other gods before God. So God's number 1. There are no idols. Don't put something, don't make something or worship something ahead of God. Don't put your time and energy there. No misusing God's name. So don't swear with God's name. Don't use God's name in vain. And then rest on the Sabbath. With these 4 sins, if you ever do sin against God, you can ask God for forgiveness and He'll forgive you. Let's look at the 6 sins against humans. Right? Honor your father and your mother. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery, as we talked about earlier. Don't steal. Don't lie. And don't covet. And coveting is kind of like having desire for someone else's things. Like, oh, my neighbor just got this new lawnmower, or they got they have a hot wife, or they have a really impressive, cool job, and I want that so bad. That's kind of what that is in layman's terms. So all of these sins are very interesting because these sins, for the most part, if you commit them, you can ask the human that you sinned against or their loved ones for forgiveness, and it can be offered to you. So let's think of disobeying your parents. When I was a kid, I used to disobey my parents a lot. I used to lie a lot. At times, I would steal from my parents. I steal both from my mom and from my dad as a young kid. And basically, that's a triple threat sin, right? I dishonored my parents, I lied, and I steal. But God incorporates forgiveness so that we can reconcile sin, so we can make it right. Forgiveness is a tool. It's a tool for sin. It's the match. It's the other half. And so if I ask my parents for forgiveness, they can forgive me. We can make it right. And I can understand the pain that I put them through and learn to sin less and hopefully become closer to them and become closer to God. I can honor them more. I can lie less. I can steal less. I can do these things, right? So that's the thing, is that if I steal from you, I can make it right. I can return it, or maybe I'm a kid, I don't have access to resources like that. And so I can just try to make it right and let you know how I understand the hurt that I caused you. And then I can ask for your forgiveness and you can offer that to me and we can repair the sin, okay? Even if I murder you, if I shoot you with a gun, even though you might not be here anymore, your loved ones might be able to offer me forgiveness. You'll see people on death row or in court hearings and things like that, and the family sometimes will be in the audience. And sometimes you'll hear of them offering forgiveness to the murderer. We saw this recently with Charlie Kirk's assassination. His wife expressed publicly forgiveness towards the assassin. And forgiveness is a tool here to sort of cover up the sin. Not cover it up, but forgiveness is the thing where it's like, if you've sinned against me, I offer you forgiveness so that you can feel what God's love is. God's love is this never-ending sort of resource that we can ask for and incorporate in our lives so that others can feel, wow, you shouldn't have been able to accept that or accept me. Not that you're supposed to accept sin, but you should not have been able to just, maybe think about me in more ways than just a black or white area where it's like you're just a murderer. You're a person who I can hate what you did, but I can love you through forgiveness. And this is the tool here. The only issue that I have is that if that abortion is truly a sin, then who forgives a pregnant woman that gets an abortion? The doctor doesn't do it. The church oftentimes doesn't do it, even though you see some, in recent years, we've seen Catholics sort of kind of say that priests can offer forgiveness to women who have had abortion. Oftentimes, the family of people who have ever had an abortion, they don't forgive them. It's sort of this closed loop where the sin, if you think it's a sin, what is the human forgiveness part of this? Is it just, because it is a sin against another human, right? If people believe that a fetus is a baby, and I'm not going to argue about this sort of realm where it's like, when is it conception? When is it a baby? When is it a fetus? It doesn't much matter to me. We need to think about this in much more nuanced terms, in a way where, who forgives her? Is it just God, right? And so in my mind, this is if you think it is murder, this is a unique murder then, where there is no chance for any real human forgiveness to take place from the victim, if you think that the fetus is a victim, right? So my question for people who are Christians, who subscribe to this, is that, do Christians have a role here to make up for the lack of human forgiveness in abortion? Why are conservative Christian, pro-life Christian conservatives making it harder on this kind of already hard situation? I can't imagine even getting abortion is easy anyway. It's not like people are going, oh my God, I can't wait to get one of those. People are running out to get one, like it's Black Friday or something. I have to imagine it's an incredibly stressful thing. It's something I don't think people really want to go through at all. And if you're really wanting my opinion, I'm not a bloodthirsty person who just wants more abortions on the planet. I would love to minimize it as much as possible. I just think we're going to be able to minimize it with other tools than just, it's legal or it's illegal. This sort of black-white thing is not working. And you realize that a lot of the actors who are pushing these sorts of things, these agendas, they're getting paid six figures to be the mouthpieces for these things. They take money from churches, they write books, and then they push for legislation to get their way so that the people in power can keep being in power, so that the red states in the Bible Belt can keep being red states in the Bible Belt. Let's perpetuate it. Let's get more cheeks in the seats. Let's get more pro-life voters, And it's like a thing where there's more we can do. We can quit talking about voting no on two. It hasn't really helped that much. We can start thinking about this from a real strategic perspective, in a brainstorming way where we can actually, what's more that we can do? And I would say, first off, Christians have a role here. And Christ is quite clear about what our role is. Our goal is not to be God, to control people. Our role is to forgive and to use forgiveness as a tool, because that's the only way people will actually feel God's love, right? Because that's the love that is so hard to give, right? How could you give me something that is so hard to give? How could you're not accepting the sin so much, but you're trying to sort of compost the sin into love through forgiveness, And those second chances, that's what God gives us if you believe in Christ. That's what really being a Christian is not being afraid of second chances, because we all need them every day. It's no different. If you believe abortion is a sin, give those people a second chance. Don't make it harder, make it easier, make their load lighter. Try to understand why they get an abortion. Things are not black and white. These are the only statistics I'll really be presenting about abortion, but it's very interesting. Last few years, we're averaging about 1 million abortions per year in the US. So 1 million abortions, medically induced abortions. Over the past decade, though, 60% of these abortions are from mothers who have already birthed at least one child. So we have a predicament here where the majority of abortions are from women who already understand the joy of childbirth. And it's not these 17-year-old, my sweet 16 teenagers who are experimenting with sex and you effed around and you found out, right? It's kind of like a thing where these women actually have already given birth and have either are mothers, and every woman gives birth as a mother, but either they're raising already one or more children, or they have already given up a child for adoption. Okay, so the question is, why are existing mothers responsible for the majority of abortions? It is an incredible statistic because let's think about it. And to me, I think there's two things. Clearly, we have a lack of resources. These women are doing cost-benefit analysis, where they are doing, they are weighing out, what is this? This is going to be a lot more work than I'm willing to put into it. Right? I already have one baby. It's been stressful. It's hard to balance being a mother while also being a provider. And we live in this predicament where, as much as people would pretend, you just got to be a stay-at-home mom. Not everyone can be that, unfortunately. We don't even have the resources to do that as a society. And we could do those things, but can we do that before we fight for making abortion illegal again, right? Why are we taking our time and energy, resources, and money and lobbying people to make something illegal when we could take those resources and just give them to existing mothers so that they can have the confidence to want to have another child, right? So number one, this is a resources issue. Number two, this is kind of a heavy shame issue. I have to imagine if I was a mother with a 4-year-old, right, and I get an unexpected pregnancy and I'm weighing out, I don't know if I want to do this again. I'm trying to provide as much as I can for this existing kid, and it's already a lot. I'm already in this 1-2-bedroom apartment or whatever, what have you, and I feel constricted and I feel limited, and I don't know if it's worth going through it again. But the issue is that if I'm an existing mother with a child and I have a second child and I give that child up for adoption, I'm going to feel awful. I'm going to feel like an awful mom because I prioritized the firstborn, and every subsequent birth or whatever, I wasn't good enough to be there for them, or I didn't have the resources. I didn't fight hard enough to acquire resources. I wasn't capable of getting those resources. They didn't exist in the environment. So there's a lot of shame in that, where it's like, I think a lot of parents wear this thing where they want to treat all their kids equally. They want to treat the firstborn like the secondborn, like the thirdborn, like the fourthborn, all the way to the lastborn, the baby of the family. And parents are really trying to balance it out, but it's really hard to balance it out. We see in the Bible lots of preference going towards firstborns, right? Usually the firstborn gets the birthright. We see in different cultures, people want their firstborn to be a male. That's an incredible blessing or something. Further, you see people have assumptions about the babies of the family. Maybe they're spoiled, or maybe they are maybe not spoiled on the other way. Maybe they're abused more or have higher expectations on them, unfair expectations on the other kids. And then further, you have assumptions about the middle kids, where it's like they might experience neglect or a variety of different things, where it's like, as much as parents would like it to be equal, it's never going to be equal. You're gonna have prejudice while you're a parent. That's okay. Sometimes it's about just trying to understand the prejudice so we can minimize them. We can ask our kids, hey, do you think I treated you equally as your other siblings? Do you think I'm treating you fairly? And trying to take that as an answer. Sometimes how we treat people isn't how we think we treated them. It's how they tell us how they felt from our treating of them. We won't know until we look in the mirror, until we get honest feedback. But we'd like to not ask and pretend that, we tried our best. We did everything we could. We did it all. We don't want to ask people, do you ever feel loved from me? Wouldn't that be the sign if I'm loving you? Not whether it's in my mind, like, I love everyone. But if everyone doesn't think that I love them or has never felt love from me, then maybe I don't. And I'm just like, I'm full of it, This is a lot of shame, though, where it's like we're balancing out, I got to treat all my kids equally. So it's like, if I've already given birth and I have a 4-year-old and I've tried to give them all I can, I don't know if I have much more to give another one, while also trying to rise in the corporate ladder or do other things or go to school or do all the stuff. Don't have the time or energy or resources. Then I can see why existing mothers are led down this road. It's a fork, right? It's either have an abortion or keep it. And I can see why, because parents don't want to feel that shame. It's heavy. It's heavy feeling like you're a defeated, defective parent, over just the consequences of unexpected pregnancy. So it's kind of a shame, but we can think about this from a realistic perspective, right? Next, I'd like to illustrate what are the incentives for pro-life conservative Christians to want abortion to be illegal. Why are we fighting so hard? This is one thing that really is probably the biggest contributing factor to why people vote Republican in many states, why people go to church, what keeps them on the hook. And the first thing we have to think of is that people are going to be perverse and selfish. Abortion is a situation where it almost creates the perfect victim. It creates a helpless, defenseless fetus, and no one wants to think of babies being killed. No one wants to think of fetuses being killed, right? No one wants to think of like frail old widows being pushed into the street, or, we think of these vulnerable populations and we want to protect them. We want to fight for them. We want to be their heroes. And pro-life conservative Christians use this as a tactic to control women to do a certain thing. Let's make it illegal so that you have to give birth. And so the issue for me comes, there's two forks, or at least there's two blades on the fork. If the woman keeps, the woman is much more controllable. Now she will be responsible for another life. She will have more stress. She'll be worried about that child's well-being. That child got beat up in school. How is that kid how are their grades? Am I worrying about their A's? Am I worrying about them disobeying me? Am I worried about them being abducted or trafficked? And a lot of this fear sometimes leads to more consumption. I got to have the best stroller on Wirecutter. I have to have the best baby food. I have to get a tutor. I have to do all these things and give them a better life than I had, right? But it just creates more consumption. I'm going to have less time as a mother. I'm going to be up late at night. I know many women who have had kids, and I don't really envy them because many of them are tired and they stay up all night and they look cranky and they don't seem like they have much patience. And it kind of sucks because you have less time you could barely take care of yourself, and now you're forced into this ring where you're having to do this side quest, And it's kind of interesting because with less time lowers a woman's social class ceiling. You have less time to pursue higher education. You have less time to climb the corporate ladder. You have less time to, take care of yourself. And these things are challenges because you might say, well, some women will be like, well, my kids gave me all the purpose in the world. And I'm going to say, that's great for you. I think that there are some outlier people who are able to rise above and be outliers, But the problem is that that's not what most women, especially women who go through with birthing a child and not getting an abortion because they're shamed from either the church or their family or those around them, is that there's going to be lots of women in trailer parks. There's going to be lots of women in less than desirable housing with fewer resources than they would ideally need in order to sustainably raise children. And this sort of control sort of just makes life heavier. It puts a backpack of weight on you. You're always going to be carrying your baby over your shoulder. And now it can be the best of times and it can be the worst of times. We see that's why are mothers responsible for the majority of abortions today? They already know what it costs. They already know what it takes. And they're saying, the math ain't mathin'. I don't see my potential being able to do this again and being able to provide enough for the first one that was born. This isn't a magical unicorn experience anymore. We have fewer resources than we really need, and I'm doing a cost-benefit analysis. I'm choosing the lesser of two evils for my personal life. Let's think about further, though. So why are the government and the churches so intertwined on this position? Because if I'm a young woman and I give birth, I'm forced to give birth, and I'm shamed into it, that kind of guarantees that if I'm going to a church, that those kids are going to church too. I'm basically stacking the deck with future churchgoers. I'm filling the seats. I'm basically raising them young, and I'm creating an insurance policy so that our church can continue prospering. It will continue. It will not lose its stronghold in the community. It's pastors want more people in their church. If you get an abortion, it's going to be one less, isn't it? Further, the same thing goes with voting. There's no coincidence that the Bible Belt and red states overlap in many ways. And if you have an abortion, you're not going to have another voter for me to control so that we can maintain this stronghold politically. Further, if you give birth, that's another voter for me. So I'm going to fight to make abortion illegal so that you're not able to have that opportunity. I'm going to control you so that I'll limit you. It makes sense because what group of people doesn't want to maintain their power for their future generations? A pastor is going to have kids, and those kids might be in charge of that next church. And this basically sets them up for success. If the woman aborts, though, the only thing the church can do is create shame. And in this case, with that shame, if a woman has had an abortion, she might be convinced to give more money to the church, to be more involved later down the road, because you know what, that was an awful thing that I did, and I feel the shame that you guys are prescribing me. And in order to make it right, I know I did something wrong, but I'm going to write a bigger check number now, because, I got to make it right. In reality, there's only one sin in the Bible that says is not capable of being forgiven. And that sin is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And just Google search that. Jesus says this. Why don't Christian conservatives fight for that one sin to be illegal? If that's the one sin that just sends you straight to hell, right? Shouldn't that be the one? But we fight for this one because it's based around the perfect victim. And when people think about this, they don't like thinking about it. And so they just subscribe to that side. But once you subscribe to that side, now you're just going to vote Republican or you're going to vote right. And so that's kind of the reason why, when you think about people who vote Republican, the three things that I think about are they are pro-life, they are anti-gay, and they are anti-immigration. And you might disagree. You might say, oh, no, I do other things. I'm libertarian. I'm other parts of the world. And that's fine. A lot of Christian conservatives are voting because of those three things. And the hook that keeps the fish on the line is this stance on abortion. And so I think in a lot of ways, I'm not trying to crash the house of cards or anything. I'm just saying that it is a house of cards based on control. Because if you do go through with the birth, you are more controllable. And people are going to be projecting, people in finance are going to be projecting, what does the life of that woman look like? And how can I sell her products to alleviate her fear and her stress? And how can I anticipate chances to profit off of her life and then her kids' lives? These are insidious things to think about, but I think they are worth considering. And again, you don't have to agree or disagree. I am not looking to change anyone, right? Only you can change yourself, right? And the odds of that are so low on any sort of topic. So I appreciate your time just for even considering these sorts of things in the reality of the universe, how it works. The last thing I'd like to share with you is, this is one of my favorite excerpts from the Bible. It's in Luke chapter 7, verses 36. And we're actually going to go all the way through verse 50. That's, I think, 15 verses. So that's kind of a lot. A lot of churches won't probably read this much. But we're going to do it today. And this is how I'd like to end today. So Luke 7:36 starts with, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his hair with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. And Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain money lender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? All right, and in verse 43, Simon replies, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This is an incredible excerpt. And we'll pull it in different ways. You'll notice at the beginning of the excerpt, that the woman was perceived as a woman who was very sinful, right? Doesn't really say why. It's up to interpretation. But a lot of Christians will look at women who have ever had abortion as incredibly sinful. They think it's the worst of the worst, an incredible, gruesome, evil thing, And they will assume this about them. They will judge. And it's interesting because in this verse, the woman never asks Jesus for forgiveness. She shows love to Jesus, And Jesus just forgives her based on her love for him. In other parts of the Bible, Jesus says that if you look after marginalized communities, particularly if you feed those that are hungry, if you give water to those who are thirsty, if you look after orphans, if you look after widows, if you look after homeless people, if you visit people in jail and in prison, if you just consider those people, that you are actually caring for Christ in those moments. And what I'm saying is that you are able to love Christ in ways that might not involve going to church, and that might not involve just asking for forgiveness. Many Christians believe in the Roman road, that if I ask for forgiveness, it is given to me. Jesus says here, the woman never even asked or even really said anything. She just showed love to Jesus, and Jesus gave her forgiveness. This is such an interesting thing because this is such parallel to today's time. We have religious conservatives who are judging much more than they forgive, who are making things much harder on people, singling people out and saying, you sinned a lot, and that's wrong. And I need to prevent this from ever happening again so that people can just quit sinning. And it's like, it's never going to happen like that, man. That's not how it works, and that's not Christ-like. Jesus shows us another way. And if we open our eyes and we read his words, we read what he says, we might be able to get a glimpse at the divine. I'd like to focus now on Luke 7:47. Whoever has been forgiven little loves little. The inverse of this is, whoever has been forgiven much loves much. My question is, you can only be forgiven much if you sin much. Can't have one without the other. I would argue that many conservative Christians that live in the United States are trying to raise their children in very sheltered environments. You see communities such as like the Amish. You see Christian conservatives raise their children being homeschooled or going to a private Christian school or just subscribing to a life that is very, very sheltered. And it creates this dilemma where if the child isn't able to sin, they will never be forgiven. And if they are never forgiven, they will never really be able to love much. And it's an interesting cycle because are we trying to put blinders on people and force them so that they never sin? Humans are humans. Jesus never forces people to do anything, right? Jesus could have easily said, all right, guys, I'm going to make all these laws illegal so that we totally eliminate sin. Jesus doesn't nail into other people's hands and force them to subscribe to anything. He recommends things at times. He will tell people to turn away from their sin, but he is not forcing them to do these things. He is also helping them many more times before he ever actually says anything. In the case of this woman who was an awful sinner, he never even told her to turn from her sin. He told her just to go in peace, right? What an interesting thing. This woman is already on the right path, and Jesus is telling her, go in peace, your sins are forgiven. You don't have to listen to the shame that the church is trying to burden you with. Further, you actually might be much closer to God than the people who are judging you, especially if you look after those in need, right? Because if you take care of those in need, Jesus says later in the Gospels that that's whenever you were looking after me. Whenever I was sick, when I was hungry, when I was thirsty, when I was in prison, and you prioritized me. You prioritized those people that live in the world. That's whenever you actually got to get a glimpse of me. So I find this interesting that Christian conservatives are basically trying to prevent sin through let me guard a marble, let me guard my children so that they never sin, and then they'll never be forgiven, and then they'll never be able to love. They'll never actually know what love is. They'll get a glimpse. They'll never actually understand because they could never feel God's love because they never fell hard, right? Further, we can look at examples in the Bible. God tells Adam and Eve, don't eat the fruit because you're going to die. What happens? Eve eats the fruit and she doesn't really die in the way that people are expecting. I would expect her to just be struck by lightning or just eliminated at that moment. That's not the case. God is a parent here telling his child, don't eat from there or else, right? And it's similar to parents today raising their kids. Don't have an abortion or else. You know better than that. You were raised in the church. You were raised to not sin. And it's this is a lie. People are often meant to sin in order to learn what forgiveness is so that then they can quit sinning, right? Let's look at other examples. Let the prodigal son run away. You have to get lost to be found again. Judas had to betray Jesus in order for him to be crucified and die and raise again. So it's interesting, this cycle where it's sin is necessary. But the problem is that we need to learn our role. Christians have a role. God has a role. God never controls. We see Jesus recommend things, encouraging people. He's healing people so that maybe they might listen to him a little bit more than just someone who's knocking on your door. Someone who knocks on your door in a white shirt and it's got something to share with you. That's not really effective. No one really wants to listen to that. But if you're open to letting someone be understood, meeting their needs in their life, that person will be receptive to whatever you tell them. If you're giving them a meal when they're hungry, they might be able to change. Whenever you're giving a woman support who's a mother or otherwise, whenever she has the financial support, she probably won't get an abortion. Okay? But the problem is that we keep trying to control and eliminate, and it's a thing where you kind of have to let people live. Live and let live. Let the pregnant woman get an abortion. And even if you think it is a sin, only in getting lost in sin can we find God's love through forgiveness and be able to learn, right? Forgiveness is the true love of God. And only in that might we be able to get a glimpse that we did something wrong, But the church is shaming people and making things illegal, making things much more harder than they need to be. They don't really care. They're trying to make these things black and white issues when these issues are incredibly gray. All right? Can we accept it like that? And so my ask today is that conservative Christians need to quit playing God through legal control and start playing their role as forgiving humans. As the inimitable Andre 3000 says, play your part. We all have a role in this play, in this movie, in this show. Okay? Your role is not to control anymore. Your role is to be there and to support and to take your money that you get paid if you're a spokesperson for conservative issues. Take that money and give it to someone who needs it. Not profiting off of issues to create problems. as if you're fighting the good fight or something, right? Sin leads to forgiveness, leads to love. We can't have forgiveness and we can't have love without sin, okay? And I'm not trying to say, let's sin more, let's sin more, let's sin more. I'm trying to say, this is the path in order to get people to sin less if you believe that abortion is truly a sin, okay? It's a gray area that requires much more precision, much more thoughtfulness, much more forgiveness. Okay? We have a role here. It's easy to want to play God, right? Be a human. See the human in someone else. Try to understand them. Do you even know someone who's ever gotten an abortion? Do you even know anyone who's considering getting an abortion? Most people have been so shamed by churches and things like that they don't even want to talk about those things with people in the church. We need to do better. And if you're someone who thinks in a certain way, we can do better. We can try. Right? It's easy to play God. It's easy to control. Let go. Let go. And meet some needs so that people can understand what God's love truly feels like. Because God doesn't control. God is a father figure, He lets people fall. And in the Old Testament, if you believe in all of this, if you believe in the Bible, and you believe things like Noah's Ark, or things where he flooded the world because they were so sinful, or Sodom and Gomorrah because they were so sinful, the New Testament brings us the new Moses, the truth, that forgiveness is the answer, right? If we lean into that, that is the tool. Quit using the tool of force and control and legality. It's a hammer. Quit using a hammer when we need to use tweezers and a magnifying glass and other things and selflessness, right? So we can relate, understand, and we might be able to actually minimize more abortions that way, right? We'll look at that Luke 7:47 from this new interpretation. And you can agree, you can disagree. It doesn't really much matter to me, okay? I just want to open your eyes to maybe a different way of thinking. And you can do with it whatever you want. And I've come to the conclusion that whoever has sinned much can be forgiven much. And whoever has been forgiven much loves much, right? You might be scared of sin and you might be scared of the world, but sin is a part of the cycle of life, Without Judas betraying Jesus, he wouldn't have been killed and resurrected, and we wouldn't have salvation today, right? It is part of it. Play your part. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for your time and energy. I'm not really expecting anything out of this. I just have some things just have been clanging in my mind for a long time since I was a kid. I've thought this way since I was in high school. Okay, and I've thought about it in many different ways. I want you to know that this channel is not being monetized in any way. I am not after perverse intentions to control you. I want you to control you. But don't let me, don't let a church, don't let the conservative Christians, don't let the shame and judgment that often persists control you. And if you're someone who is shaming someone or practicing more judgment than forgiveness, I hope that you check yourself. There's a way out of this if we try. If we try to take Jesus seriously, he will take you seriously. And you might open a new perspective on how God can use you in your life. You might be less ignorant of the world around you and the situations in which you can actually make an impact, okay? You can make people feel God's love by forgiving people, by not judging them, by not casting shame, by being selfless and giving resources, or at least sharing resources that maybe you don't even have with people, by making people feel comfortable and letting them feel like you are a safe place, that you are a sanctuary for them. The sanctuary is not in a church. The sanctuary is in people who make room for other people, that we can bare our souls, and hopefully we can get closer so we can understand each other and hopefully make it lighter while we're on this earth together. And that might be a more effective way than trying to hammer everything down. You know? We have to let people fall and stop trying to cushion their fall. Okay? Let them fall and be there for them when they need you. Right? Don't avoid your role. Play your role. And quit playing God. Okay? Infinite grace and peace to you.